Hello, everybody. Welcome to Nature Source Care. My name is Dr. Funda Goldman. I'm a naturopathic physician. And in today's talk, I was going to cover homeopathy for when life is unfair, the Bach Flower remedy Willow. And yeah, let's get into it. A note beforehand, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. For any symptoms that persist or worsen, please consult with a qualified medical professional. It's always best to determine the root cause of any disease and to develop a comprehensive treatment plan. And while homeopathy, Bach flower remedies can be very effective, they may not be appropriate for everyone or as a single therapy. So please keep all of this in. So the Bach flower remedies in general, if you're not familiar with them, Bach flower remedies are a kind of homeopathy, which is a whole different paradigm of energy medicine that's not typically included in a modern Western conventional medicine. But it is long-standing. It's been used for, centuries, if not millennia. Um, and if you're interested in learning more about the background or history of Bach flower remedies, I would check out my first Bach flower remedy video, Walnut, for new beginnings, because I get into it more of it there. But the general concept with Bach flower remedies is that disease stems from an inner struggle. Okay. And so the reason why I talk about these remedies and why I use them in my practice is I found them to be particularly useful when dealing with mental, emotional, and spiritual conditions that people come into the office with. If you want to learn more about the different Bach flowers, I have a growing playlist. I think I've done most of them, the majority of them by now. Have a few more to go. And then I also have a larger homeopathy playlist as well that includes some classic homeopathy. And once I get done with all the Bach flowers, I'll be doing more classic homeopathy. Um, but yeah, that's where, if you want more of this kind of stuff, that's where you can find it. So the keynote for this particular remedy is placing blame on other people and things. So really kind of pointing the finger outwards. And the inner state of being that's troubled here is that there's judgment based on external circumstances instead of the internal experience. So the other thing is that this can be a fairly intense and kind of dark energy to deal with, and so people can get into very seriously negative mental situations here with this if they're in this kind of willow state or circumstance. So you always want to make sure that people are safe with themselves and with others, and if not, direct them towards resources that they can tap into if that's not you. And then the other thing is that, there's a whole list of reasons, besides this willow concept that people can be quite negative. Okay. So, common physiological things are things like thyroid issues and blood sugar issues like hypoglycemia or diabetes or prediabetes and that sort of thing. Those sorts of things can really affect the way we think and the way we feel about things. So you want to make sure that that's not what's causing the problem. Again, like in my kind of cautionary slide, it's like you want to think about all the different things, and the Bach flower remedy Willow may be one thing, one tool in the toolbox of many. Okay, so make sure you're dealing with the right stuff. Otherwise, it won't work, and somebody might get worse. So, all right. So let's talk about the willow symptoms when they present and how they present in somebody, whether it's yourself or somebody else. So, as I mentioned, the main thing is that they're blaming other people and things and circumstances of their life, um, and it may get to the point where it can be it can be kind of acute, where it's just kind of a phase. But for some people, it ends up becoming a chronic thing where it's almost like almost becoming an identity for them. And the thing is, it can be really intense, these feelings that they have, these negative feelings that they have. Um, and they can not only get upset with, people and things and circumstances, but get really upset with or resent life or a higher power. Like, why am I here? Why is this happening? Which we all get into, but some more than others, right? And so there's definitely a victim mentality generally. And it may not be stated, but there can be this notion or feeling of life owes me. They feel like, I've been put through these difficult circumstances and now life, really owes me. I need to, get something back for all my pain and suffering and disappointment, that sort of thing. Um, and so, disappointments obviously are projected on the outside world. They may have a long list of disappointments or one particular disappointment that was particularly impactful for them. And the thing is, again, if this is more of a chronic state, um, especially towards kind of the later part of life, people may really become quite bitter. And because they're so bitter and disappointed with, what they've experienced, they may just stop engaging. Okay, so this is where, again, like, you want to make sure that, if this might kind of show up as depression, in kind of a clinical sense, but you want to kind of get it like what's causing the depression. Is this more of a physiological thing or is it a circumstantial thing? And that's the thing with Willow is that maybe sometimes people don't have, different kinds of tools to help them digest and unpack, what they perceive as negative circumstances, or maybe they don't have tools to help them maybe, reframe circumstances. Um, and that's part of what's getting them down is they don't know how to move through it. Um, the other thing is that people, if they're in a willow state, because they're already kind of, in a, sensitive state and, disappointed state, they can get really easily offended, by any, slight thing that doesn't go their way or that they perceive as, more offense, because it's just sort of more evidence that, they've been wronged. Yeah, and that, life doesn't go their way and this sort of thing. Yeah. The other thing is they can carry grudges for a very long time. So, especially if the circumstances that they're complaining about are, involve other people, maybe something on the job, maybe they were let go, or maybe some relationship that didn't work out. They can just hold on to that for, a very long time, never get past it. And so, since they never get past it, again, it becomes deeply entrenched in their psychology and it kind of colors their view of they kind of have their defenses up and so even if something comes along they may shoo it away because their negativity blocks them from seeing the good in some new situation. um, yeah, so obviously the thoughts are not just negative but they can be very destructive. And sometimes it gets to the point where, they get very envious of other people who seem to be successful and happy, even though they don't know that whole person's story. Who knows, maybe these other people that they're so envious of don't actually have the perfect life that they think that they have. Like I remember one time I had this colleague, another naturopathic doctor who I worked with. Um, or we would change shifts. So, we weren't actually working together typically, but we were like, "Oh, hey, how's it going?" as we were kind of, changing shifts. And I remember thinking at some point, I was like, she seems like she's got like a pretty good life. Like, it's things that most people probably want, like, seemed happily married. Who knows if she actually was, was having her first child, had a successful, practice business, had a supportive family. Um, traveled, educated, beautiful. I mean, a lovely person. Like, I was just like, wow, she seems like she's got it. She got all the, good cards, And then, um, yeah, tragically, she ended up passing away from breast cancer at a young age, like her early 30s. Um, so it's just like you never know. That's the thing is, you never quite know what people are really dealing with, just because of the way they present things. And most people don't go through life unscathed. And that's, part of the human condition. But sometimes, again, it's like when something really that somebody's very attached to doesn't happen for them, or doesn't happen in the timeline that they're looking for or prefer, that they can take it to heart and make it something about them, make it a, like life is against them, that sort of thing. Um, and then the thing is they create a negative spiral and they get worse, and they get more negative, and then when they get more negative, they see more negativity, they bring more negativity to life, and life becomes more negative. So it's hard for them to break out of that negative cycle. Yeah. So Willow might be helpful in that situation. So people might become so envious of others who are happy and successful that they actually sabotage other people. Instead of like maybe somebody's getting married or somebody got a promotion at work or a raise or something, and they won't, instead of saying, "Oh, congratulations, that's so great," they'll be like, "Oh, well, why you?" You know you know what I mean? Like sometimes it's not quite that obvious, or something like, "Oh, well, great," and even their tone, even though the words might seem like they're congratulating somebody, their tone is indicating that they're not, right? Um, and so the thing is, the sabotage may not be outright, but it may be, usually pretty passive aggressive. It's like this person's just boiling, usually underneath the surface, and small things can tip them off and make them, potentially explode. Um, but it's usually more of like kind of this constant stream of like, this sucks, that sucks, my life sucks, and things never get better. That sort of like dialogue is usually what's coming from them. Um, the other thing is that because they kind of have this life owes me because, life screwed me over type of mentality or perception, is that even when other people are kind and giving and generous with them, they will not necessarily like reciprocate because they're like, since I was so wronged, now generally life and people owe me. Um, yeah, they will withhold support and praise of other people and just keep like basically taking and taking from other people. So the thing is, because of this, not only like kind of negative mentality, but also um, this, this sort of can be withholding position that they have sometimes, that'll drive a lot of people away because a lot of people are just like, I'm just getting sucked into this like vortex of negativity. Um, the other thing is that they might just isolate on their own because they might just sort of give up on relationships like, well, relationships don't work out for me, people suck, I'm kind of done with it. Um, the other possibility is that they end up befriending people who are similar to them with a similar kind of negative mindset, and then they both get worse because they just kind of reinforce each other's negative thought patterns. And sometimes like it's kind of funny to hear conversations with when you get two of these people together because they'll kind of compete, they'll be like, "Oh, my life sucks," and the other person, "Well, my life sucks more." It's almost like that kind of conversation. Um, so yeah, that can be really tough to break, especially if they're, um, you know, uh, encouraging other people. I mean, again, they can be kind of the negative Nelly in the bunch, but when they get with other people who are like that, it just can be worse all around, even worse, right? Then you get a whole conglomeration of people like this, and then the vibe is really negative and dark. Um, so one thing to consider though, with willow as a plant, and not all willow are weeping willow, but there are a lot of weeping willow trees. And weeping is all about like sadness and disappointment and grief and stuff like that. But the interesting thing I thought about was, willow is also the source of aspirin, which is probably, I'm guessing, one of the most commonly used medications around the world. And it actually derives from willow, the willow tree. Um, so it's kind of interesting that like again, even in that, like the more kind of biochemical usage of the plant willow, you kind of see the same thing where you have pain, but it's also the cure. And it's also pretty commonplace. So again, most people at some point in their life will feel like a victim. It's just kind of a matter of like how deep and long does it go, you know? So the risk of somebody who doesn't, somehow shift this willow state is that, they will poison others with their negativity and may completely give up on themselves and their own life. Um, the potential outcome of taking a remedy like this, though, is, first of all, that they would acknowledge their negativity. Some people don't even realize how negative they are, because that just becomes their experience. So they don't kind of question it after a while. Um, and they'll start to take responsibility for what they can do. I mean, there are definitely circumstances, that people go through which are, horrific, that I would never wish on anybody, because it can be so damaging to self, the mind, the heart, the spirit, the body, in whatever form. Um, but again, assuming, they're still here and they're still, on this planet, it's kind of like, well, what are they going to do with that? Are they going to let it sink them? I mean, it was already bad enough, right, that they went through that experience, but then what do they do with that? Is there anything that they can do? And there's usually something that people can do. Not always. And it can be a long road for a lot of people who've gone through serious circumstances, who have really serious like PTSD and that sort of thing. Um, but then it's like, are they, or is it really too late to do anything? And that I'm not sure is the case. There's usually something that people can do to find themselves in slightly better, if not much better place. Um, so people can start to at least think about, oh, well, how can I deal with my reaction to these negative circumstances or events? Um, and they'll have motivation to try something, at least. There's a couple I know who lost their child to COVID, and he was 20, 21. Lost him a couple years ago, and I see them quite often. They're because I see them when they visit his gravesite and stuff like that. And it's been interesting, just even as a passerby, I just say hello when I'm walking by. Um, and we've talked a little bit. Um, but it's just interesting to see that slowly over time you can see in the beginning they were just completely devastated and was just numb probably because there was just so much pain, which is typical for a really tragic situation like that. But over time you could see that they were starting to try to get into a better place. Like the wife, she took a weekend trip with a friend somewhere to the beach, I think. And then she also organized like a little fundraiser on her son's behalf and that sort of thing. Um, so you could see that, like, naturally, with a little bit of time, um, that they were starting to slowly move through the grief. But again, I wasn't their doctor or whatever. But maybe something like this would have been helpful in accelerating that process. You know, yeah. So the other thing is that part of the problem when people get in this really serious, like, negativity state and victim mentality is that sometimes what's the reason why they're in that state is because they're extremely attached to a certain outcome in their life. And that can be part of it where, like, if this one thing doesn't happen, then everything else is meaningless or doesn't really count. And that can be, a hard stance. Because we don't have complete control over everything in our life. The other thing is that the other reason why this might really hit some people hard when they go through negative circumstances that um, they don't understand fully that part of process of creating something in your life, and whether it's, who knows, a relationship or whether it's a job or circumstance or something. Yeah, sometimes, things just fall in your lap. But a lot of times, it's about persistence. And the persistence is not just about, like, showing up and doing the thing like an external way, but showing up and, like, staying open to inspiration and hope and, direction from some higher power as to how and when this thing is going to happen. And so, again, when, circumstances don't work out the way somebody hopes, it can set them back. Uh, but uh, and with this willow remedy, they might start to realize that they actually have um, more tools and energy available to keep their mind on track even when the disappointments come, so that they don't get derailed. Because a lot of times people, if they don't get what they're hoping for initially, they just will stop trying. So yeah, so they can learn that if they really focus, rather than focus on the circumstances that aren't working, if they focus on little tiny bits of anything positive, they can start to slowly but surely, if they stay on that new train, the positivity train, they can start to pull themselves out of this negativity loop. But it takes effort. Like it's like something they can't just expect. Like a lot of people just expect their mind to support them, and sometimes they really have to work or make an active effort to keep their mind on a positive track. Um, And so that's part of what they can do is learn more about how to harness the power of the mind rather than just let the mind, because part of the thing is like their mind is just dictating to them. One has dictated to them through judgment that the circumstances is completely awful. And maybe it is, initially, and it feels bad and all that. But then it's like, okay, well, what do we do with this? It's kind of like, it's like that, the cliche, like, what do you do when life gives you lemons? Well, maybe plant some lemon seeds and build a lemon orchard. Right? Um, so it's that kind of thing where, again, it's about helping people. This remedy can potentially help people to shift the internal energy so the energy is directed more towards listening to a higher power and higher powers' directives and support and that sort of thing, and also surrendering to divine timing. And sometimes too, people like get attached to something that's not actually in their best interest. So maybe, life, the universe, source, nature, whatever you want to call it, has a different course for them that's very different from what they had in mind, but it's actually going to, create more happiness, prosperity, connection, but they're just not open to it. So that's another possibility. So it's kind of so what they can potentially do is learn about the power of the mind and also learn about this, idea of co-creation where they're not just sort of like dictating, their mind is dictating, well, if I don't achieve X, Y, and Z by such and such time, then, it's all kaput, there's nothing, it's not all pointless. Rather than seeing them as maybe stepping stones or um, sometimes it's, they just realize this wasn't a good fit for me and that's why it didn't work out. Like be grateful for blessings that were never granted because again, maybe what you thought you wanted and needed and would make you happy would actually not be a good thing. So in the long run. So the other thing is that, if you're taking a remedy like this, somebody would potentially learn a little bit more about how to create meaning for events and circumstances because, and this is a yoga concept that I've taught a lot, is that essentially all circumstances, all events are empty, and the only meaning that these things have is the meaning that we bring to them. So an example I often use is like your cell phone, right? If you look at your cell phone, you look at the buttons and you turn it on, and you can scroll around or do whatever you do with your phone. What do you think about when you look at your phone? Like a lot of people will say, when I ask this question, they'll say, "Oh, it's like a communication device," or some people will say it's a burden, or some people will say it's a disruption, or some people will say it's a necessity. Those are usually the responses I get from people when I ask them, when you think about your cell phone, what comes to mind? Now, if I gave the cell phone to a huge dog like a Great Dane, and I asked the Great Dane, assuming I could, I asked the Great Dane, "What do you think about this phone?" They would probably grab it, maybe kick it around a little bit, maybe chew on it. They would probably see it as a toy. They probably wouldn't see it necessarily as a burden. I mean, unless it was like going off and screeching at them or something. Um, but you can see, like, that's just a simple example of you can take that concept of emptiness and apply it to anything and everything. So, and I think people who are pretty advanced in learning and having learned how to work with their mind and how to keep their mind on a positive, open track where it's not necessarily trying to dictate life circumstances, but work in, as a partner with the divine. That's where um, I think that's when the real joy comes through for people, is that they don't necessarily realize, how often their mind is creating negative stories about life circumstances, like even simple things like traffic. You say traffic, and most people, they think traffic, that's a negative thing. Well, what if, during the times of traffic, you're sitting in your car, you're listening to books on tape, or, you've got some language tapes in or something. You learn, some people learned whole language like by sitting in their car. You turn on your music and you're chanting your mantras. I mean, it could, you could change, by opening up your mind and changing your perspective, then the circumstances and your feelings about them can change as well. And sometimes it's definitely harder than others, but that's also why, like this couple I mentioned, you know, um, they were trying to create meaning out of a difficult situation by, having this fundraiser, based or dedicated to their son and stuff like that. So they were trying to take that grief and turn it into something positive. And again, it takes time and effort. And again, maybe again, these folks would have been helped along a little bit with this willow remedy. Um, so the other thing is that, I have plenty of patience, because usually when people call me, it's because they're not feeling well, physically, mentally, emotionally, or what have you. Um, and so the other thing is, like, another person who comes to mind is a patient of mine who developed breast cancer a few years ago, had multiple surgeries to deal with that. And then through that process, had to go through, I think, chemo and radiation. And then through the radiation, because of the way her body was positioned, had a problem with her shoulder, needed shoulder surgery, was unable to work for a long period of time, and at various times was unable to even drive because the strap, the seatbelt, across the chest was too uncomfortable. So it really uprooted her life and turned her life upside down. And the thing is that, when she was first a patient of mine, she was somebody who I would say, was probably more, on the critical side, had high standards for herself and life, and, was very much a workaholic, and would often, have a hard time following through on treatment plans and stuff like that, because she always put work first. Um, and the thing is, like, then she shows up with, breast cancer, and we're working through that. And, that's definitely a difficult circumstance to work through for most people. Um, with that kind of diagnosis. And so we would work on this, I sort of me sort of teaching her, and things like, okay, when you feel negative, you know, just try it, because she was somebody who had, faith in a particular religion or whatever. And I said, okay, so just put it out there, to the universe, or whatever you want to call it. Show me the good in this, because this is looking, and you have conversations with the universe, like, okay, universe, this is looking like a whole pile of crap to me. This is, be honest, because it's not about suppressing emotions, but it's about working through them. So it's like, this is looking really horrible to me. I don't understand it. I'm confused. I'm disappointed. I mean, what do I do with this? Like, where's the good in this? And especially if you can at least put that thought or question out there. What I've seen, and what people I've worked with have seen, is that if you give it a little bit of time, like give it 3 days, usually something will show up. Somebody will show up, a conversation will happen, or something will show up where you will see some glimmer of positivity in the circumstances in which, they just seem completely awful and, insurmountable. And that's not an easy place to go to, when you're feeling so disappointed and upset and lost and afraid and angry and, all these other things. But if somehow, almost like a sword cutting through all that negativity, brewing, and swirling in the mind and in the heart, even in the body, because people get anxious just because of their thoughts, right? Even the circumstances of past, like the physiology remains. It's like, show me the good. How Show me anything that's good, even if it's like, show me anything that's good about the situation. And again, give it 3 days. And you know, I haven't heard of anybody yet, and so again, but almost everybody I give this to, they're like, within 3 days, something came through. Somebody said something. I saw a program. I watched a movie. I heard something on the radio that made me think, even for a second, that there is something good that could come out of this. And that's the turning point. That's the turning point. And then the thing is, like, you got to keep doing that. And it's like, okay, show me the good of today. That's like another kind of technique, is like, I used to work in patient psych for several years, and then I worked outpatient psych for many more years. I think 10 years total inpatient, outpatient psych. I worked with adults, adolescents, and kids. A lot of people very negative in their thought process. So, another technique I would use with people, or a tool that I would give people, is, okay, yeah, okay, life sucks, today sucks, it all sucks, I get it. Um, can you name just one thing? Like, what was the biggest gift you received today? And most people just sort of look there blank, initially. And then you can see their mind like digging, and it's almost like the wheels in their head are start to spin in backwards because their mind is spinning forward in on this train of negativity. And when I ask them a question like, tell me what the biggest gift of your day was, it stops the negativity train and it starts to put them on the positivity train. Um, and if they can keep up a habit like that, some people do like a gratitude journal, that's another thing. But even if it's like, and the thing is, like, if you start asking people to, like, get support and support other people with, people are, it's so easy for people to get on the negativity train in all sorts of ways beyond just, deep level symptoms. But, what was the biggest gift of your day today? Start conversations like that, rather than like, sometimes, how are you? And then you kind of know, some people are like, oh, I mean, most people won't say, oh, yeah, life's fantastic. I'm so excited by it. Like, yeah, I'm okay. I'm getting by, same old, that sort of thing. But if you encourage like positive talk, with self and others through something like, what was the biggest gift of your day? You can really turn things around. I've given that to a bunch of people, and even that simple, phrase or question of self and others can really start to shift the energy. Yeah. So, again, so this is clearly more than just talking about Willow. But the thing is, like, you might need the Willow first, because if somebody's so negative, and you say something like, "What was the biggest gift of your life, today?" They might just look at you like you're crazy. Like, like they won't even be open to that. I mean, so that's why, again, like, if they're really just having a hard time, then the Willow might help them be open to other things that will, over time, increase their perspective of more positivity in their life generally. Right. Okay, so as I've always said with Bach flower remedies and homeopathy in general, the trick is to really understand the nuances of the person you're working with, and also understand the nuances of the remedies. So I have a whole lot of other remedies on the Bach flowers, and some of them they might be related. That's where the trick or the magic is like figuring out which one of these, through the nuances and subtlety, is the best one for a person. So other remedies that you might consider, holly is the one that first comes to mind. Because holly is sort of like the Scrooge, and I have videos, I think, on all the remedies I've listed here. Yeah. So, holly is about not recognizing the support life offers, which is kind of like two sides of the same coin. Um, I think holly people can also kind of initially show up as negative, like a Scrooge type. and they're not recognizing again this even the small tiny, it seemed like small tiny things in their life that are actually where life is still supporting them. They feel sort of abandoned by life, like, oh, life just, threw me in the corner or something. Um, but Holly can get people to start recognizing the small things, kind of like what I was talking about, and move them forward. I don't necessarily see Holly, even though they're also generally seen as like negative people. I think the uh, Willow folks, Holly people can be a little bit more kind of like angry, I would say, like outwardly. And the Willow people can be a little bit more like chip on their shoulder, waiting for things to get worse instead of better, you know, uh, disengaged. So, you got to kind of look at those two to see which one might be more appropriate for somebody. Um, Also, remedies for exhaustion and overwhelm. Sometimes people are just tired, and that's why they're getting negative because they're just been doing a lot and they're tired. So elm, hornbeam, oak, and olive. I have a video on all four of those. Elm is when people are over identifying with their role too much, and so they're just kind of living up to some script and not listening to themselves and what they need. Hornbeam is when people are making excessive mental effort, like students and stuff like that, and then they're tired from that. Oak is when people are just kind of mm, they're just kind of rigidly following some, pursuing some goal, even if the goal is no longer relevant or necessary. They're just kind of a little bit kind of rigid that way. But they keep going at it, but it's like, is this goal even important anymore? They may not be, kind of reflecting on whether they should keep going or not. Olive people are just people with like long-term chronic overwork and they're exhausted from that. Aspen might be something to consider. Aspen is for people who are generally oversensitive. So, I would think with Aspen though, like the patients I've had with Aspen who did well with Aspen, it's like every little thing bothers them, like noises bother. So it's not even like like sometimes it's some circumstance can kind of put them over the edge, but it's kind of like, uh, you know, clothes, noises, people, what they say, what they don't say, like almost anything will kind of set Aspen folks off because they're just, oversensitive. White chestnut. So this is kind of an obsessive energy. Uh, but it's kind of like, again, people who are like perseverating, keep thinking about the same thing. And so they might be kind of rigidly pursuing some goal because they're kind of obsessed with it, even if it's not good for them. So you can kind of see like with oak, oak is a little bit more about kind of duty. White chestnut is not necessarily about duty, so that's like a differentiation there. Chestnut bud, this is for folks who weren't learning from their mistakes. So maybe somebody keeps doing the same thing over and over again, and they keep ending up with a negative result, and then they end up in a willow state. And the reason why they ended up in a willow state was because they weren't learning from the mistakes they were making. So that might be helpful there. Sweet chestnut is for dark night of the soul. This is for when you're following your path, especially for spiritual people, have some spiritual consciousness. And they're following their path, their spiritual path or whatever. And at some point, like it might be like they don't feel like they're getting guidance anymore, support anymore from the universe or, nature, source, whatever. And that can cause some confusion. Yeah. Um, but usually sweet chestnut people, dark night of the soul, they're not necessarily going around and like complaining about life and, kind of, kind of the dark cloud. They're not like the dark cloud that kind of drifts into the room and kind of makes everybody else's day worse. It's a little bit different. Wild oat, this is for people who aren't really following their true life path. So this might be for people who are attempting to follow a path that's more conventional, that's kind of more known or acceptable. And not that they're necessarily thinking that way, it's just that, their path is something more kind of unique than the conventional path. They keep trying to do something conventional and it doesn't work for them. So they can get frustrated. Vervain, this is, somebody who's going to be more in an angry type state, kind of like Holly, kind of like Willow. But the thing with Vervain people is it's all about supporting a cause. So Willow people may not necessarily be about supporting cause. It's more about like, oh, life didn't work out. But they can kind of go hand in hand. I mean, I could see like, one might come after the other. Like maybe somebody gets disappointed and they can't process the pain or disappointment, so they end up in a Willow state. And then, they end up sitting around with other negative people and getting worse. And, then they end up, becoming a terrorist or something like that. It could go that direction. So, because Vervain's, pretty, violent, if not almost violent type of energy. But again, it's all about the cause with Vervain people. So, Pine. So, um, with Willow, part of what might need to happen is that people learn how to forgive and move on, situations or the universe or people or whatever. But Pine is more about self-blame. So sometimes people get stuck, um, and they won't necessarily, they get stuck in life because they're blaming themselves and they don't feel like they deserve because of things that they've done. They don't feel like they deserve to be happy. But they're not usually sitting around like being like, intensely negative all the time. They might, to some extent, say negative things almost as like a smoke screen for them not admitting to self or others that they blame themselves, and don't believe that they deserve happiness for something that they've done in the past, and that's why they're not moving ahead. So there can be a little bit of smoke screen there. Remedies for needing this. I have a video on this. So chicory for needy mother, heather for needy child. So sometimes all this negativity stuff can just be attention seeking. So you got to suss that out. And chicory is for people who kind of the needy mother, they're sort of controlling and they make people need them because they need that kind of attention. And heather is a needy child. So somebody who maybe didn't get a lot of attention. And so they're trying to fill that hole from long ago. So sometimes people just don't even recognize that they're being so negative, because that's what they've grown up with and that's what other people were doing. So they think that's normal and they think that's how you, whatever, relate to people. That's the only way they know of relating to people. So there can be some of that kind of more deep neediness stuff. Some people might need, remedies for hopelessness. So in that video, I talk about gorse. Gorse people are feeling hopeless and tired, but they'll still keep trying something, anything to, get to a better place. Wild rose people, on the other hand, they're kind of at the end of their rope, and so they might be so tired and frustrated that they just are just like, whatever, like nothing's worked. I don't even want to try anymore, all hope is lost kind of situation. And then other remedies for self-confidence. This might be an issue. So Serato, in that video I talk about Serato, with about somebody who's not trusting their intuition. They trust what other people say and they're not trusting their intuition, and their intuition's trying to guide them to a better path, but they're not really listening or trusting that. So then they fall into a trap because they listen to other people and what other people's opinions or thoughts are, but that's not what they really need. It's there because other people have their own limitations and biases or whatever. And then there's Larch, I talk about in the video. Larch is for people who have this feeling of inferiority to others, and so they won't necessarily try because they don't feel like they're sort of worthy of it. Like they feel like other people deserve it more than they do. But again, Larch people aren't necessarily going to sit around and complain all the time the way Willow people will. I mean, maybe they will be like, oh, I didn't, get that promotion. But the thing with large people is they probably won't even apply for the promotion, because they won't even let themselves go that far of applying. So they might complain that they haven't like moved up in their job, but they're also not putting themselves in a place where they could move up in their job because they're, kind of self-sabotaging that way. Okay, so yeah, a lot of remedies to consider, a lot to sort through with Bach flowers. But again, if you find uh, the right one or best one for somebody, a lot of good can come from it. So, as always, I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate you stopping by and listening to one of my talks. And, all the support people, provide the channel generally and me generally, the subscribes, the likes, the shares, the comments, especially when people say, oh, your video really helped me. Um, it's all very much appreciated. And donations too, people send in, so it's all good. It's all appreciated. So thank you for supporting my work and the channel in all those different ways. And I do have another YouTube channel on Vedic astrology. The name of that channel is Light Vedic Astrology. You can check that out if that's interesting to you. And I have an online photography gallery gift shop you can check out if you're interested in photography stuff. So, all right. So otherwise, I hope you're all doing well. Take care, and until next one.